Hello and welcome back to our YouTube channel, my dear viewers. So, in this third part of the video for the poem I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, I'm going to discuss the major themes of this poem, and apart from that, the main figures of speech that have been used, and the concluding statement or the major key points on which the questions can be framed. Those points also I'm going to discuss at the end of the video. So, let us begin. So let us first focus on the major themes on which this poem is based. Children, if you have gone through my previous videos where I have given explanation of this poem, you must have noticed that the central theme or the most important theme of this poem is about the freedom versus enslavement. Now let us see how. The first point is there's a contrast that has been shown throughout in this poem between freedom and enslavement. The theme of freedom versus enslavement is the central idea of this poem, with the free bird representing freedom and the caged bird is symbolizing enslavement. Second point is the freedom of the free bird is highlighted in two, three paragraphs in this poem. The free bird is depicted as carefree, claiming the sky as his own. You must be remembering the first stanza of this poem, and daring to dip his wings in the orange sun rays. That shows complete freedom for this free bird. His unrestricted movements and joyful existence also represent the essence of freedom. Third point is enslavement of the caged bird. This has been the major theme throughout the various stanzas of this poem. Where the caged bird's wings are clipped, it is in confinement, feet are tied, and all these are highlighting his state of captivity as well as lack of freedom. He's imprisoned, unable to fully experience the world beyond his narrow cage. Next is bars of rage and helplessness. That is also an important point under freedom and versus enslavement. So the caged bird's rage, anger, fury is mentioned, indicating his frustration and anger because it is in the confinement. However, he can only see the world through the bars of his cage. All these are emphasizing on the helplessness of this caged bird in the face of his captivity. Now, this another important point that you need to notice, children. Uh, the question can be framed on this point also in the reference to the context. Longing for freedom. Yes, the poem is highlighting the theme of enslavement of the caged bird, but it also shows us that this bird is not giving up. It has a hope that it will be free someday, and for that it is raising its voice. So despite the harsh conditions, the cage bird continues to sing a fearful trill. Yes, there is a subdued fear, there is a feeling of hopelessness, but not the bird is not losing the hope completely, and it is longing for the freedom. And the method that this bird has used is by singing. His song becomes a powerful expression of his desire for liberation, even though the freedom he is wishing is far from seen in his vision right now. But he is not losing hope, and he has a strong desire to get its freedom. The second major theme that has been shown through this poem is racism and slavery. So there is a metaphorical representation to show these points. The poem uses the contrasting imagery of the free bird and the caged bird to symbolize the racial divide in America during apartheid, for which they had civil rights movement. The free bird represents the dominant white race, while the caged bird serves as a metaphor for African Americans and their confinement within a racist society, which was due to the application of Jim Crow laws in America. The second is confinement and struggle. That has also been shown in the theme of racism and slavery that these African Americans were facing during apartheid. The caged bird symbolizes the restrictions placed on African Americans during the era of slavery and racial segregation. The poem portrays their struggle for freedom and the limited opportunities they had to carve out a peaceful existence in a society that denied them of their basic rights and subject them to poverty and discrimination in the society. Then there is also an important subpoint under this. There was systemic oppression of these people. So this poem indirectly references the Jim Crow laws that had been practiced in America, and they were very discriminatory in their nature. These laws enforced racial segregation. The third important theme that is being discussed in this poem is voice against oppression. So the first one is physical and mental agony. The poem portrays the physical pain and mental agony endured by the caged bird, and the mention of clipped wings, tied feet, and restricted movement emphasizes the physical confinement and loss of freedom of this caged bird. Despite this, the caged bird retains its dignity and inner strength when it is raising its voice against this oppression. Next is rebellion and expression. This is also shown in this poem when the bird is singing for its freedom. The caged bird's song becomes an act of rebellion against this systemic oppression. It also symbolizes the African American community's refusal to be silenced and their determination to express their struggles and aspirations. So, the song that this caged bird sings becomes a powerful tool to raise awareness and advocate for equality. The third important thing is never giving up attitude. So the bird's song was like the way of saying, I won't give up. Even though it felt like nobody was listening, the bird kept singing. The poem also highlights the spirit of African Americans who, despite facing discrimination, held on to their strength and fought for their rights. And their persistent voice against oppression eventually led to the dismantling of segregation and granting of the equal rights as the white Americans had in the society. So ultimately, the voice that this bird is raising leads to a result. In other words, the African Americans were fighting for their rights, and ultimately, because they kept on raising the voice, they got equal rights in the society. Now let us go through the literary devices or figures of speech that have been used in this poem. Children, this point is extremely important for studying a poem because without figures of speech or literary devices, we cannot call it a poem. To give a beauty or imagery to a poem, the poet uses these kind of literary devices which gives poetic effect to a poem, a melodic effect. Okay, so here in this poem, the first one is rhyme. So rhymes, you must be remembering from my previous videos, when the two words at the end of each line or in a stanza rhyme with each other, they sound similar. This is called a rhyme. So in with a fearful of things unknown but longed for still. So the still, hill, they are rhyming words. Herd, bird, rhyming words. One more example. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. So this poem is not completely based on a specific rhyming scheme, but here and there, few melodic rhymes you notice in this poem. Next is alliteration. So you must be remembering the consonant, initial consonant sounds which are same, like can seldom see through SS. The free bird thinks of another breeze, BB. The fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, so WW. Shadows shout, SS. This is called alliteration. It is a literary device where a sequence of words in a sentence or phrase have similar or initial same consonant sound. Next is repetition. So repetition is a literary device where some lines are repeated or some words are repeated again and again, or an entire stanza gets repeated in the poem in order to create a powerful impact or in order to emphasize on the central theme or ideas in this poem. So we have enough examples of repetition in this poem, like for example, and dares to claim the sky, and he names the sky his own. This is in order to create an impact or in order to emphasize on the point that the free bird is showing an authority over everything which is around the bird. Now the next is repetition of the line, so he opens his throat to sing. So this is also emphasizing on the idea that the caged bird is having a spirit of not giving up and raising its voice. And there's again a repetition of the entire stanza. The caged bird sings with a fearful thrill of things unknown but long for still. This is again being used in order to create an emphasis on the point that, in spite of being in the discriminatory position, the caged bird is not giving up and it is fighting for its freedom, or it is raising its voice in order to get its freedom. Next is personification. You must be remembering these are the attributes of human qualities or characteristics to a non human entity. Like his shadow shouts on a nightmare screen. So, can a shadow shout? No, but the shadow of the caged bird is personified as shouting on the nightmare screen. So this uh, shadow doesn't have ability to shout, but the poet attributes this human-like action to the shadow to convey the intensity of the bird's trapped emotions. And the poet wants to tell us that this bird wants to come out of this confinement. For that, even its shadow is shouting. Like every part, every feeling of this bird is shouting for the freedom, raising its voice. Next is, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees. Here the poet personifies the trade winds, giving them the human-like quality of being sighing. Does tree sigh? No, we sigh. Ah, like that. No, we make a sound when we fall, and by chance, if we get saved, we say, oh God, thank you, God, I got saved. So that kind of quality of sighing the poet is giving to the trade winds. Next is metaphor. So this is the most important figure of speech that has been used in this poem, because this entire poem is actually a metaphor for the caged bird is for African Americans and the free bird is for white Americans. So in the context of this poem, um, you must be remembering metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two different things by stating that one thing is another. So here the caged bird is shown for African Americans. But in metaphor, we don't use the words like, as in order to compare. Okay. So in the context of the poem, the caged bird serves as a metaphor for not only Maya Angelou herself, but also represents the collective experience of African Americans who endured racism, discrimination, and oppression during the era of apartheid and beyond. The caged bird symbolizes their limited freedom, confinement, and the systematic barriers that prevented them from realizing their full potential and aspiration. So this entire poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is a metaphor. Because there is also an autobiographical element in this poem where the caged bird is a metaphor for Maya Angelou herself as well. So, children, there's also an important element of literary device called foreshadowing that has been used in this poem. So, what is foreshadowing basically? Uh, this is a hint which is given in the previous stanza that what is coming in the next stanza. So, it creates a sense of anticipation or prepares the reader for upcoming ideas. For example, the description of the free bird's freedom and soaring in the beginning hints at the contrast with the caged bird's confinement. The caged bird's song, Longing for Freedom, foreshadows the poem's theme of oppression and the desire for liberation. So, foreshadowing has also been used in this poem. One more important literary device, that is imagery. This is beautifully used in this poem. So it is a literary device that uses descriptive language in order to create sensory details. Like it appeals to our senses of sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, so that it helps us or help a reader to visualize and emotionally connect with the poem or any text. This is called imagery, where we can create different, we can feel it through our senses, the emotions or the lines or the descriptions that have been used in this poem or in any other text. So, like dips his wings in the orange sun rays. Now, imagine a bird going up and down, and the sky is orange, and see how beautiful it looks. So, these lines create visual imagery. Next is trade winds soft through the sighing tree. Doesn't it create an image of auditory imagery? Like sighing, we can imagine in our thoughts the sound of sighing trees when wind blows and the trees make sound shh, shh, like that. So this is auditory imagery. Next is fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn. So these lines also create a sense of touch and sight. Like you can feel the fat worms when you read these lines. Can't you imagine fat worms in your mind? So the reader gives us texture and all those details in order to create a sense of touch and sight. Next is his shadow shouts on a nightmare screen. So again, like no, an auditory imagery, like it evokes a sense of fear and darkness, and the reader can imagine the bird's shadow casting a fearful trill, and it is screaming for its freedom. So, in the end, we will conclude by discussing the most important key points of this poem, on which you might get several questions in your exam. The first one is the poem is discussing about the Jim Crow laws, not directly, but yes, indirectly. So, the poem Caged Bird can be understood in the context of Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation and denied equal rights to African Americans during civil rights movement or during apartheid. Then there is a play of contrast in this poem that we noticed throughout this poem. So it is a powerful play of contrast between the free bird and the cage bird, and it is highlighting the stark differences in freedom and opportunities experienced by different individuals or communities. Next is there's an autobiographical element in this poem. Maya Angelou, the poet herself, experienced the discrimination and segregation of these racial or due to these racial laws. So the poem may incorporate autobiographical elements reflecting Angelou's struggles, aspirations, and desire for freedom and fight against the oppression that was there in the society due to the application of Jim Crow laws. So these are the detailed explanations regarding this poem. This themes and literary devices and the major key points, you will get most of the questions based on these points. So please go through the video carefully. If you have any doubt, you can always ask me in the comment section. So thank you, my dear viewers. I hope you would appreciate my efforts of making these videos. I am trying my best to give you the most important content that is relevant for you based on your ICSE exams. If you have any further clarification, you can always write your questions, your doubts in the comment section. I will try my best to answer them. Do like, share, and subscribe our channel.